Imbibitor Lunae in version 1.3. Now let's talk about his build. Very awesome character. I love his design and all the skills that we've already seen in version 1.2. But what exactly does he do? What is the build for him? And also what Lightcones team comps? We'll talk about all of them in this video. But first things first, I think the most important thing we need to know is how does this character exactly work? Now he is a tricky character because his basic attack is like so-so. What we want to do is actually like press and enhance his basic attacks. As you can see here from the image, you use up like 3 skill points and then you are able to do an enhanced basic attack. So these are like the variations of the enhancements, and of course the most coolest one will be the last one where he hits like a few times and then he does that finger thing and then this thing comes from the ground. Super cool animations already. Of course, drinks a lot of skill points. We'll talk about builds and team comps to address that in a little bit too. One thing about his overall kit is his ultimate ability. When he casts it, he gets these like special charges that can be used in place of course, skill points, which is very important because at least you don't keep drinking skill points that the rest of your team might require as well. So with that aside, now let's talk about the builds because this is going to determine how he's going to be built and what he revolve around with. Alright, so let's first talk about the sets that I think is super strong for Imbibitor Lunae before we jump into like the main stats and all of that. Now first things first, the one that everyone is going to be intuitively going towards is the Wastelander of Banditry Desert, and it's correct because the 2-piece you get imaginary damage bonus 10%, which benefits all of his abilities. His out does damage, his basic attack does damage, imaginary damage bonus is also not easy to get compared to the likes of like attack percentage. 4-piece here is where it gets a little bit tricky and where the conditional part of it comes about. You need to have teammates that are able to debuff the enemy, and also in order to get this like additional 20% crit damage, it has to be an imprisoned enemies. So the enemies, if they are slow enough, they are long under this crit damage buff, it is very justifiable to get this additional 20%. It's like super juicy, like 10% crit rate, 20% crit damage, amazing, especially if you're running him with a defense shredder. But for those of us who maybe are not running with defense shredder, or we already have a lot of crit rate, some other alternatives that we can think about will be firstly the Guard of Wuthering Snow. I don't mean to go all the way to 4-piece, I'm talking about just like a 2-piece here, a 2-piece here. The reason for that is if you don't get the value out of all this, and maybe the crit damage here is not very often proc because the enemy's imprisonment maybe not all the time, or you're not fighting enemies with always like imprisonment weakness and stuff, you don't have Silver Wolf on your team. In that case, you could justify that the 8% here damage ignore might be a little bit more beneficial compared to this second benefit, and especially if you don't proc it very often because of your team composition. Having some defense damage reduction is good, especially if you have characters like Mark 7 Lynx who draws the aggro to Imbibitor Lunae. You get that damage reduced as well. I think it's super good for a bit of sustain, especially for a destruction character who doesn't mind getting into the thick of fights and taking some damage. The third option, on maybe 4th place, but the third one I want to talk about is Musketeer of Warweed. Attack percentage increased by 12%. The problem with this is it's quite easy to find, but the nice part about this is you get a very nice basic attack damage bonus, which is pretty much majority of the damage for his overall kit. I would say this is probably like the lowest out of all of those on the list, especially unless like you have a super god tier one because you have been farming this since the start. You have a really strong 4-piece. In that sense, if you have the right main stats and stuff like that, I would say just go for it. It probably would be better than some meh Wastelander of Banditry Desert because you haven't farmed this at all. So just make it and then slowly like switch around once you get better pieces, not too much detriment overall. But the one I want to really talk about is Longevous Disciple. This one on first glance seems kinda meh because it gives him like max HP 12%. He's not a character that scales off directly with max HP for his DPS, but this benefits his overall kit because if you have a bit of HP, you give him a bit more sustainability together with like his 5-star stats. He does get a bit better value out of this 12%. If you're playing him with like Lynx to draw the aggro to him without a shield, he will be proccing this crit rate increase by 8% for 2 turns. That's 16% crit rate from the 4-piece stat as well, more HP, and whenever he's like hit, consumes HP, he basically gets this stacks up. So if the enemies are hitting him, he just gets a free crit rate from the 4-piece, and this is more unconditional in a sense compared to, of course, Wastelander of Banditry Desert, because debuffing enemies means that you have to make sure that they don't get cleansed, they don't have resistance, your characters have high effect hit rate, and you must also make sure that they have imprisonment. This one is like more generic. As long as you get hit, you take some damage. As long as you have like Lynx on your team, you don't even need to apply debuff on the enemy, and you get 16% crit rate. Quite a significant amount of value because this one is like the equivalent of 20% crit rate if you convert the crit damage over the crit rate, and that's like at the max value you get. This one is already 16 out of 20, so I would say it's pretty good for consideration as well. The last one that some of you might be thinking of is Thief of Shooting Meteor. Maybe you saw a bit of this energy restoration here that you think it might be interesting to build, and building break effect on him in some sense, maybe you're thinking might do a lot of wonders. I have done like imaginary break effect, what it means, like if I stack all the way up to like 150 break effect, how much actually does it increase in the slow and the benefit it gets for imaginary characters. If you are not too sure how the ratios work, check that video out. I think it's a ton of help. You will really like it because we go quite in depth in break effect on imaginary units. The TLDR for us to progress this video, I don't think it's very worth it, but I'll let you be the judge of that for yourself and your own account. And the last thing I want to talk about is of course Genius of Brilliant Stars. If you have a character like Silver Wolf, or maybe you're entering battles with a lot of quantum weakness, this 20% defense ignore could be a lot better as a niche set compared to maybe this ability here, because as long as the enemy have quantum weakness, you will immediately be able to like ignore defense. So that is something that is pretty good as well. Genius of Brilliant Stars as a niche set. So we finished all like the 4-piece set bonuses. The rest of them are niche, they can work, like the speed set and stuff like that, the 2-piece as a combo. Feel free to do whatever combo you have that you have better sets, but I think that we talked about a very nice variety of 4-piece that you can go for his best in slots and stuff like that already. 2-piece is where it gets a little bit more straightforward, I would say, not too much variety. The first thing that everyone is going to be considering is Inert Salsoto versus Rutilant Arena, and in my opinion, Rutilant Arena is slightly more beneficial. Although it has a higher 70% crit rate amount compared to the 50%, this one is follow-up attack is kind of useless for him, 15%, so you're really only getting this 15% for the ultimate. Whereas if you compare to this, it's like basic attack increases by 20%, which is really most of the damage coming from Imbibitor Lunae's kit is going to be his enhanced basic attack. You don't get the skill damage, but still, crit rate here, basic attack 20%, I think this is a lot more value, especially since his overall kit, if you are maybe running with Longevous Disciple, you are maybe running with Banditry of Wastelander of Banditry Desert, and you have other means to like buff crit rate, his Tracers, and his signature light cone, and etc, or whatever not, or other 5-star limited light cones, you likely will be hitting this 70% crit rate quite easily on this character. So I would say it's actually quite safe to go ahead and put the Rutilant Arena. Don't worry about this like 70% crit rate. Quite easy to reach in my opinion. The other options, of course, if you have very good stats, you have very high crit rate already, and maybe you're over capping on crit rate, this 8%, you don't want it to be wasted. There are two other options you have if you're over capping on crit. The first one, which is the more inferior one, will be Celestial Differentiator. At least you get 16% crit damage here, although you lose out on like the 20% basic attack increase. This one is universal because crit damage benefits your ultimate ability as well. But that is one option which is slightly inferior because you lose out really on, you might as well just like tune your crit rate amounts so that you get a bit more other stats elsewhere. The one that I think is actually a solid alternative will be Broken Kill, and the reason for that is giving him a bit of effect resistance here in the 10%, and maybe you have like some substat rolls here and there, like every single gear has like one substat roll in them. You would be able to hit this 30% effect rest quite easily, and in that sense, you can buff your whole team's crit damage by 10%, which also includes like your secondary DPS maybe. You're running a secondary DPS, gets this benefit as well, and if your secondary DPS is also running the same thing, you basically like buff everyone in the entire team crit damage across the board, which means you also resist a lot more like crowd control, DOT, especially destruction characters get hit quite a lot. I think this effect rest is not going to be wasted. I personally am going to run Blade with this one once I have a very good set. Still struggling to find a optimal set, but yeah, I think this is also really strong, a good alternative to Rutilant Arena, especially if you're over capping on crit rate as well. Okay, so that's like for the relic sets that we were talking about. Now let's jump right into the main stats. Since we were on the 2-piece, let's start off with the easier one. We can talk about the main stat for the planar sphere first. Definitely is going to be imaginary damage bonus. If you really don't have attack percentage, I guess it's okay to use, but I think most of us will have an imaginary damage bonus. In my opinion, like if you have a god tier attack percentage like with 30-40% crit value, whereas your imaginary damage bonus is like near 0 and you are able to complete a set, attack percentage likely will outperform, but do the testing on your account because every account is different. By and large, general trend is imaginary damage bonus is going to outperform attack percentage unless the substats are so much more different and you are able to like complete sets and whatnot. For the self-modeling resin, I think there are two cases to build here, and this is where I want to introduce the first concept of Imbibitor Lunae, whether you want to build him for speed or whether you want to build him a bit slower. If you are going for a fast Imbibitor Lunae than Heng, you will want to go a bit more for maybe energy regeneration rate. If you are going for a slow Imbibitor Lunae, you can go more towards attack percentage, but these two in my opinion are interchangeable depending on your team composition as well. Why do I say that? The faster Imbibitor Lunae moves means the more skill points he's going to be using. If he moves faster, you generally want to have a little bit more energy restoration so you can keep up with the net equilibrium of skill point usage. If you don't burst his ultimate, you don't get that skill points, so faster Imbibitor Lunae generally want to have much more uptime on the regeneration. You sacrifice a bit of your attack stat, but you can likely get that out from your other characters as well. A slower Imbibitor Lunae, who is really like focusing on attack percentage, boots and stuff like that, you don't really have this energy restoration rate requirement because likely your supports will be moving quite fast, having a lot of skill point positive already because they generate much more for the overall team, so it balances the skill. Think of it like a balancing skill in that sense, and that is where I would recommend you move accordingly. Just put a random one, just feel a sense of which one feels better to you, but rule of thumb is fast Imbibitor Lunae energy restoration rate, slower Imbibitor Lunae attack percentage. I think it's fine. Fast and slow is relative to the other team members who are generating skill points on your team, of course. And that is for the 2-piece bonus. Let's talk about the 4-piece bonus. Head and hands, basically the substats that you want to be looking for here because you can't customize the main stat. The substats you want to go for is like crit rate, crit damage, attack percentage, all very, very strong. If you have the option, you could get a little bit of speed or effect resistance depending on what is required of your character as well. I think those are more or less okay. HP defense is not useless at all. I think those are really strong also. And for those of you who have no idea like what is the difference, for example, between HP percentage and defense percentage, I actually talked about it on the channel already. We can see that it comes really close, but you want to know which one is better, that video will be meant for you as well. It's not in the scope of this video to tell you which mean stat is better or which substat is better to go for and which one outperforms. This video is really about Imbibitor Lunae build guide. So for the self-monitoring, for the main stat for this body, what I would actually recommend going for is more likely than not is crit damage, especially if you have enough crit rate to maybe proc the Rutaland Arena's 70% minimum threshold. If you have not enough to proc the minimum threshold, you can consider going for crit rate to push it up. But I think it's probably interchangeable between crit rate, crit damage for the body. Quite straightforward so far. And last but not least, let's talk about the boots. This is where you really tweak speed or attack percentage. As mentioned a little bit earlier in the link rope section, there are 2 ways to build Imbibitor Lunae. One is a fast one with speed, and one is an attack percentage slow Imbibitor Lunae, so you focus on doing big damage. What's the pro and cons? The pros of going speed is you get more actions, you are able to cycle through your character faster, which means that likely your overall damage might be higher, especially if your team members can support in terms of funneling that resource, because attack percentage is much more easily obtainable from like Tingyun, Asta, and other Harmony characters. All can give attack. So speed, in my opinion, will outperform if you can match your supports to him. The downside, of course, the cons for speed, is that you will need a lot more battery for him, be it in terms of funneling resources into the character like energy or funneling skill points. Your teammates might not be fast enough to keep up with their turns so that they can keep generating skill points. It does put a strain on accounts, and that is like the key downside. Attack percentage is a little bit easier because if your supports are moving faster, even if he doesn't get his burst up and using it all the time, at least you'll be doing a decent amount of damage. You will feel your rotations are much smoother. You can always use his enhanced basic attack without much trouble. Speed might be a bit trickier for newer players to get into because you will realize, oh I didn't manage to get enough skill points and now I have to just normal attack with Imbibitor Lunae. I think that's one of the biggest downsides of going a speed build. But then again, whichever you have better substats you can consider, and of course learning is very easy to just understand how team compositions are. We talked about that in this video and other guide videos on the channel. We always have resource for you guys. So and if you're finding value in this video so far, do like and subscribe for more of such future Honkai Star Rail content too. We do this every single patch, every single new character and stuff that comes out as well. So that's like my thoughts for overall like the relics. Now let's jump into Lightcones, which I think is also a very interesting section as well. Okay, Lightcones. The main pros of the most welcome new if you are not building a character that has attack percentage. Most of the time we will likely be running like harmony characters for the overall roster, so attack percentage is quite easy to find. The only exception that I think comes more valid is if you have it as high super imposition, maybe like super imposition 5, if you attack and use your ultimate, you already get like 48% stack from dealing damage to the enemy. You don't get the last one for skill here, so you don't hit like 72% attack percentage. This is good if you're running maybe with Pella, who is defense shredding the enemies, so you supplement it by finding attack percentage from other sources. Why would you be running Pella instead? Because if you remember the Wastelander of Banditry Desert Relic set, when you attack debuff enemies, you get more crit rate. So more often than not, maybe some of us might switch out our harmony character for a defense shredder type character. So that is like one thing I want to point out as well. Not totally useless compared to like maybe a Secret Vow, which has a much more unconditional damage dealt increase of 20%, which is very difficult to find also compared to attack percentage that comes from many sources. The main downside I think of a Secret Vow is that not only of course it's a limited light cone for 4 stars, but this second part here of dealing extra damage of like 20%, so doubling the bonuses in the effect, requires the enemy to be at the same HP or higher. For a character like Ireland Blade, where it was like super hyped up this light cone, very easy to proc because they have self HP sapping mechanics. Imbibitor Lunae on the other hand might not be able to use this as well, because unless you have a character like Lynx that draws the aggro directly to him, so they keep like attacking him to reduce his HP as well, this second part might go unused a majority of the time for the battle as well. And that is like just one thing I want to talk about, the consistency. But of course damage percentage, much harder to get. The next one I want to talk about is Under the Blue Sky. This one on surface seems to be quite good because you get quite a lot of crit rate if you defeat an enemy even at super imposition 1, and it's quite a long lasting one, like for 3 turns as well. I want to point out a few things. Let's look at it at super imposition 5 for example. You do get a very nice healthy crit rate, which already seems to be a lot better than the Mo welcomes you, because this one is like unconditional 32% attack. You don't even have to like wind up to it as well. But one of the downsides here is when you get this additional crit rate of 24%, if you're running Rutland Arena, like the Relic set, the 2-piece Relic set, you need to have like 70% crit rate in order to proc it, and more often than not we will already be aligning our base gear to have 70%, so we get the additional 20% basic attack bonus. What this means, if you defeat an enemy, this will most likely overcap on crit rate, probably pushing you past 100%. In that sense, a lot of stats is wasted. So one thing to note for any of you who are considering using this light cone because maybe it's the only one you have, I think it's a decent light cone, especially if you don't have a Secret Vow who gives a more unconditional damage percentage. But one thing to consider is you might want to tweak your relic sets around so that you don't overcap on crit and in the end wasting this stat. This is quite easy to proc, especially if there's easy, ads on the field, small mobs. Destruction characters generally have splash in their kit, so they can take out the small mobs themselves quite well too, so I wouldn't say it's like very difficult to proc. Next up we have, I think this is the free-to-play Wolf Walk Time. You can get it from the Memory of Chaos set as well. Let's look at it as Super Imposition 5 because it's free-to-play, we can get it all eventually. 20% attack, I think it's pretty nice. Increases damage of enemies affected by burn or bleed. This one of course requires you to have a very nice setup. It's better in a sense compared to a Secret Vow because you get the unconditional 32%. So if you are having like S1, Super Imposition 1 Secret Vow versus this, likely this is going to be better if you have a character that is able to like proc burn or bleed in the kit as well. More team, I would say if your team comm allows it, this one is likely pretty good. Wolf Walk Time, since it's also a free light cone. Now what's more interesting probably will be the pay to play options as well as the 5-star light cones, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. First, let's start off with Nowhere to Run. This one is of course a paid light cone with here Imbibitor Lunae as well as Blade in the design. When you have increasing wearer's attack by 24%, this is pretty strong. It's already rivaling the one where we saw earlier on, the most welcomes you. Whenever the wearer defeats an enemy, they restore HP equal to 12% of their attack. I think in that sense, this one is okay, especially if you are running together with defense shredder teammates, focusing on like debuffing the enemies and maybe focusing on like crit rate, crit damage buffs for him. Then you can get some additional attack percentage, which doesn't really diminish. A bit more sustain to keep him alive on the battlefield a bit longer, meaning that you have less pressure on your defensive slot. Maybe you're running not a pure defensive unit. I think it's definitely worth considering for Imbibitor Lunae, especially since destruction characters will defeat enemies quite a lot. They will be taking quite a lot of damage from their increased natural aggro, and if you're running with links, this is probably pretty good. The more ads on the field, the more you benefit, or the more small mobs, because you get even more sustain as well. Something irreplaceable, this is a standard light cone, a Clara signature light cone. You get an attack percentage 24%, very similar to the battle pass one that we saw. When wearer defeats an enemy or is hit, immediately restores 8% HP, can only trigger once per turn. At the same time, wearer's damage is increased 24% by the end of their turn. This is, I think, a lot stronger for a slower... actually, fast or slow, I think it doesn't matter because it's the end of the next turn. So I think it doesn't really affect whether he's fast or he's slow. And destruction characters generally will be taking quite a lot of damage. I think this is probably, out of all that we've seen so far, he's the best one for him. If you have this lying around your account, just slap it on him, put links on him, you get a lot of sustain here, decent amount of attack increase and also damage increase, which is more unconditional compared to a Secret Vow, who is a bit more conditional. At the same time, you also get the 5-star stat scaling for this one, which DPS definitely likes. So if you have this, it's better than all of the 4-star options from what I see already. And free to play, this is the Herta Light Cone shop on the Fall of an Aeon, one you get from the simulated universe. I'm going to look at it at max superimposition because we can easily get it that high. So whenever the wearer attacks, attack is increased by 16% in this battle, stacks up to 4 times, so this will be something like 64% attack increase that winds up slowly. When the wearer inflicts weakness break on enemies, the wearer's damage dealt is increased by 24%. I think this really, if you're fighting a lot of imaginary weakness enemies, this probably will be pretty good for you to stack up. It gives you the best of both worlds. You get good base stats, you get decent amount of attack percentage from here as well, and you also get a pretty fair bit of damage increase of 24%, which makes it rival Secret Vow already, because you get a lot of damage, the damage percentage 24%. This one is a bit more conditional, and to top it off, you also get like slightly higher attack stats, HP stats. In my opinion, at Superimposition 1, Secret Vow likely will underperform a Superimposition 5 on the Fall of an Aeon, just by thinking about it. We will have to do more testing if like Superimposition Secret Vow is going to lose to Superimposition 5 on the Fall of Aeon. If you're a free-to-play player, you don't have much options, I think this is a pretty good free-to-play option for Imbibitor Lunae. I would likely turn to this one if I don't have any other light cones available. If I have Blade, I'll definitely slap this one on Blade and put this one on Imbibitor Lunae, and that's like some thoughts I have. Of course, Unreachable Sight Blade's signature light cone, I'm not going to be dwelling too much on this one. Gives nice crit rate, gives nice HP, whereas attack also damage increase. This is very, very good for him. If you have this and you don't have Blade for some reason, Imbibitor Lunae likely will be able to use this one quite well. And as you can see, this is time of recording is 1.2. I don't have the signature light cone for Imbibitor Lunae. If you're interested in that, I have another video separately already, but I guess you wouldn't be checking out this section just for me to tell you that his signature is best in slot. It likely will be as well. This is really for people who are looking for other options and maybe having different combinations of stuff. I hope that helped you also. Now let's go on into the final segment, which is on team compositions. Okay, team compositions. I'm going to use here Dan Heng, base Dan Heng as the proxy. And I think there are 3 main characters that need to be considered. The first kind are battery kind of characters, which is like March 7, Ting Yun. These 2 are likely going to be very, very solid characters for any of you who do not have the new links. Maybe you are not pulling on Fu Xuan's banner as well. You don't want to build pity because you just pulled Imbibitor Lunae. So in a sense, these characters, Ting Yun as well as March 7, likely will be strong bets. She funnels energy directly to him. March 7 provides a shield, drawing aggro to him, so when enemies attack him, he gets more energy as well. The other characters that are worth considering will be skill point neutral or skill point positive DPSs, like Ireland, who doesn't take up any skill points, Blade, who only takes up 1 skill point in every 3 turns, but he deals a lot more damage, using that skill point much more effectively, increasing the efficiency of the overall team. Other characters that benefit or work very well is like Su Sang at E1. She has the ability to refund skill points when attacking a weakness broken enemy. Her action advance when using her ultimate also allows you the chance to just basic attack and quickly get back a skill point for Imbibitor Lunae too. So these 3 characters I think are very, very strong to be generally skill point positive. That's like the second category. The last category here, of course, is your buffing section. We already talked about Ting Yun, but I think characters that buff a lot, for example, like Yu Kong, I think is also really, really strong for him. Probably the second best, if not for Ting Yun, for Imbibitor Lunae. Other characters that I think are really solid, of course, will be your healer sustain characters like Luo Ta, Bai Lu, Japat, You have your sustain like Natasha, Lynx that's coming up as well. All these characters, tons of value because they provide a lot of skill points to him, also helps him sustain the overall roster. But one thing to note is, maybe we might not want to like draw the aggro away from him with like high aggro drawing characters like Japat, high aggro drawing characters like Fire MC as well. That's like just some things I want to point out. If you are interested in more theory about team compositions, check out this video we have on the channel already. Very, very useful. We go into many team comps, many different combos and stuff to consider. We also cover a lot more of fast done Heng, slow done Heng, what to build, and how exactly you want to form your teams too. And if you appreciate such content, do like and subscribe. We do this every single character as well. And thank you so much for watching. We'll do it for Fucc and Link's coming up as well. So take back a look on the channel. See you in the next video.